Kathy Lee. I've been coming to Restore for the past year now. I grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic school. I believed in God. I never had a relationship with God, not the type that I have now. Growing up, I didn't realize I had bipolar disorder. When I found out, it kind of made sense to me, looking back, because I was a very nervous child. I was extremely sensitive. I cried a lot. Even when I found out that I had the disorder, for the first few years I would say, I'm bipolar. Then I came to the conclusion, I'm not bipolar, it's just something that I have. It doesn't define me. And I really didn't know what did define me. And I would ask God, why me? Why would you do something like this to somebody like me? In this past year, my bipolar disorder has, I don't want to say the disorder itself has changed, because maybe it hasn't, but the way I handle it has definitely changed. I started relying on God more, the God that I've gotten to know over the past year, the Christ I've gotten to have a relationship with, the Savior I've learned to actually let into my heart instead of keeping him on the outside. And with my relationship with God blooming this year, becoming so much stronger, I've become stronger. I've let my walls down. I don't let the bipolar disorder define me anymore. I see him now, not as somebody just to be feared, but somebody to love, somebody to worship, somebody who loves me back unconditionally. Despite all my sins, all my flaws, my life has done a 180. I'm a totally different person than I was a year ago.
Isn't that great? Lori was a little girl in the youth group when you were probably middle school. So that's what that's what you're talking about. But they do grow up. That's what I just want to affirm. They do grow up. Okay. Yeah, and my very first ministry, Lori was involved in the youth program. Her family's still there, and been a great blessing to me in the process of who I am today. And Jess mentioned the fact that we went to college together, and he came to class, and it was a pleasure having him in class when he came. So, you understand what I'm saying? Yeah, right, yeah. And Judy, on the other hand, she was there taking notes, and of course he passed because he was reading her notes. So, great wife, always somebody, between Jesus and Judy, he will be saved. That's just the way we put it. It's that simple. I bring you greetings from New England. How many of you are actually from New England? You have lived there. All right, we've got some real Yankees here on the back row, and that's a pleasure as well to say, this is where it all started, because in the midst of what we are experiencing here in Florida, remember now that the church really got its evangelistic zeal first in New England. And the ultimate outcome for all of us is this, is that we're saved by grace. Is that right? How many of you are saved by grace? Anybody? Yeah. If you know Jesus, everybody is saved by grace. But there's a passage of Scripture that really opens the door for understanding this. This comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and 9. Because when we think of grace, we only think in terms of salvation only. But salvation is much larger. It entails so many more aspects of our life than we ever allow it. And we only think in terms of maybe going to heaven, when in fact there is a great deal more to be done as a reflection of God's grace right here, right now, today. That passage in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, just those first 7 verses, if we can get that on the screen. Let me just simply, as we prepare for that, remind you that there is always good news and bad news in the context of our reading of Scripture and our understanding of God's grace. It's much like the storm that went through Kansas. And the older preacher said, I got some good news, I got some bad news. The storm tore off the roof, and he said, the good news is there's plenty of money to fix that roof. The bad news is still in your pocket. Okay? So, listen to this passage of Scripture. If you have a Bible with you, open it up. The print will be larger than what is on the screen. But listen to it very closely, because here is another aspect of God's grace. And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in its generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. And they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord. And then by the will of God also to us. So we urge Titus, just as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part. But since you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and the love we have kindled in you, see also that you excel in this grace of giving. And I know right there, we've already lost half of this congregation when we start talking about giving. Because giving is connected with the idea of money. And when we start talking about money, we say, okay, when is this service over? But understand, when you know the grace of God, it just realigns all of our values in life. It really begins to shore up for us what it is that's actually important and what is not. And you know there's a day coming when the life here on earth moves us to that life in the heavenlies with the Father. And the irony is that there are so many things that we just simply will not take with us in the process. And yet we continue to gather. We moved now for the 3rd time in the last 5 years. Not because we haven't been paying our rent, but only because we moved closer to children and grandchildren. Now, how many of you think that that's a good idea? Yeah, both of you. So, you understand a little bit of what I'm saying here. Because this time we moved right down in the middle between the 4 children and the 8 grandchildren. And we thought we were going to save gas. No, that was wrong, because now we make even more trips to basketball games and to volleyball games, and to soccer games. And now the one grandchild who doesn't like to sweat, she's into fencing. So we have to go watch her fence. Have you ever had a grandchild do fencing? Nor have I. No, I don't understand it at all. But in the midst of it, you make decisions, your values all shift when you come into the grace of God. And that's where we begin to realize that there is this kind of cyclical nature to the grace of God when we give. New England. My Yankees on the back row. Of course, that's when the Pilgrims came, and they came with a high motivation to bring the gospel. It wasn't the first church in the New World. Jamestown, down in Virginia, had already known about the gospel, but it was really the Church of England at the time, and they weren't evangelistic in nature. But these pilgrims, they wanted the people of the New World to know who Jesus was. And in the process, they expanded and they grew, and there were more churches that were started, and then the move was westward. And in the course of time, you know that there have been at least two great major revivals in our country. The one is called the First Great Revival, the Great Awakening, if you will. The other is the Second Great Awakening. Each one lasted anywhere from 40 to 60 years in length. And every time, each of those started where? In New England. And they moved westward. So you understand that the Church of Christ in New England is responsible for all the churches effectively that moved westward. And that was first then over into Pennsylvania, then into Ohio and Kentucky and Illinois and India. Does Indiana have churches? I was just wondering, just questioning. Okay, so in the midst of all that, you know the church moved westward. And they did because of the generosity of the churches that were in New England. They loved God. They had a vision. But in the course of time, the church ebbed and flowed. And when the church was in its poorest condition and just getting started, effectively in the Midwest, the churches of New England supported and sent missionaries, and they sent money. And of course, now, as things stand in New England, there are very few churches. In fact, it's the least churched region of the United States. We have lots of beautiful church buildings in New England, don't we? But I must report that some of them, of course, are karate studios, and they are gift shops and antique shops and painting stores, and they are ski shops, and they Big, beautiful First Baptist in downtown Boston has been turned into 8 condos. And so here the story goes. You just realize that the church has fundamentally begun to die in New England, which is exactly why we are there. And you know what the privilege, what the beauty of the story is that now the churches that the Church of New England started years ago are able to now replenish, give out of grace, and help start new churches in New England. That was what Jeff was talking about earlier. That's the nature of the testimony here of this young lady from the church that we just started in Quincy, Massachusetts. And so you begin to look at this story. You hear the Apostle Paul teach. You come across the idea that grace is much more than I'm going to heaven. I'm saved. Both are true. But it's the issue more of how we live out that grace from day to day. We think that it's only one way, that there's nothing that you can do. Grace is not earned. Okay. And yet there's more to grace than what most of us want to believe, or even what we've been taught. And so this grace of giving, let me just follow through what the Apostle Paul says. I'll use his very words, if you will. When you experience God's grace, precisely what you're going to do is excel in your giving. Not the mere fact that you give, but that you will excel in your giving. That's what he says in this text. It's this generosity piece where we are able to see the need and understand that there are those thousands upon thousands. Do you know that the United States is now the 3rd largest unchurched nation in the world? We're only behind China and India in terms of the percentage of churches per capita relative to the people in our country. Think about it for a minute, will you? We are the 3rd largest unchurched nation. That's why precisely the same thing comes around from other lands. And if you were to go into different parts of our country, you'll see it. You'll see where people from other parts of the world are coming as Christian missionaries to us. In fact, I was sitting in the airport in New York one day, and there were three men in their custom clothing, and I could tell they were Africanos. And so I just, out of my own shyness, went up and asked them, "Where are you all going? Where are you headed?" And of course, one said, "I'm going to Los Angeles." A second said, "I'm going to Detroit." And a third said, "I'm staying here in New York." I said, "What are you all going to be doing?" "We're going to share the grace of God with America." You see, after World War II, our missionaries did such a marvelous job of taking the gospel to Africa. It was there that they began to preach and to teach and went out into the bushes and into the natives, and in the midst of it began teaching and education programs that allowed the people to hear what God was doing in this world. And now, here we are, some 60, 70 years later, and what's happening? Those very same people in Africa are sending missionaries to our country to try to teach amongst the Muslims about Jesus. Jeff alluded to the fact that, in fact, we are also doing some of the same thing. We have planted 4 ethnic churches in our immediate region. We have a Chinese church we started right in Manchester, New Hampshire. A Korean church also in southern New Hampshire. We have a Cambodian church, 30,000 Cambodians that live in Lowell, Massachusetts. Another 30,000 that are in Lynn, Massachusetts. We've started a West African church down in Providence, Rhode Island. Why? Because these people groups have come, and what they really need more than food, more than shelter, more than us giving them resources that will help them live from day to day, what they need more than anything else is to know about the grace of God. And the only way that that'll happen is when there are those who will give generously. They will excel, as Paul says, in their giving. That's really what grace is all about. It's when God comes and He captures our heart. And that's what Paul says. First they gave themselves to God. And then they gave themselves to us. That we might be able to spread the gospel. Wherever God sends us, take the gospel so that others can know the grace of God too. Well, that's only part of it. You see, because in the midst of it, when you know God's grace, we'll also practice the principle of equality. Now, I know that sounds a little bit political in structure, doesn't it? Equality. That almost sounds like socialism, but that's not what Paul has in mind at all. This equality issue that he mentions here has to do with the fact that there is this ebb and flow. There is this time in which the churches in New England sent people westward with their monies, and they started new churches. It's now the case whereby a church like Anchor Christian sends missionaries and money to New England in order to start new churches. That's the equality he's talking about. It's realizing that in the midst of growth, God had 20,000 in one Christian church. And now we have between 9,000 and 10,000 that worship in Christian churches like yours here. But understand clearly with me. Equality simply means that we see where the need is. And we give out of our abundance. And we share generously, and we excel in our giving so that the gospel can go. And sometimes Satan interferes, and there are those churches that split. My sister and brother-in-law, who are in their late 80s, are down in the Branson, Missouri area. And the church where they are has just told the older people of the congregation, we're changing things, and if you don't like it, you can just leave. So they didn't like it, and they were forced to leave. You see, that's in the context of an abundance of arrogance, in my opinion. An abundance of individuals who think that they can control God's church. And what I want to suggest to you today, that this equality is not that we all just simply sell everything we have and give it to the poor, but that we do realign our values so that we give in abundance, so the gospel can go to all. Not only in foreign lands, but right here in the United States as well. That's the grace of God. There's a third element. It's a little more palatable, I suppose you could say. But when we experience God's grace, we will give thanks for the privilege of giving. Usually we wait for other people to thank us when we give. But what Paul says here in this passage is that we will have the opportunity to give thanks for the opportunity to give. How can I help? You know, before long, we're going to be seeing some new buildings around here. And the first focus, of course, will be upon where those children will be meeting, those classrooms, and where we'll have a larger space for our fellowship dinners and times together and groups that can come in and help and work in the region. Understand, we have an opportunity to do this. And so the real response to all of this new giving is, what can I do to help? How much more do you need? Can I give even if there's already enough given? Because my guess, the leadership of this church will then use the excess to help others, to allow the church to grow. Not just here, but around the world. It all is a matter of alignment, isn't it? It's what do I value? There's a little video clip. I hope this isn't disturbing to you. First time I saw the movie, I was shaken. But I want you to take a look at this video for me, and then I have about 2 more words to say thereafter. This comes from Schindler's List.
Alaska, there are 1,100 people who are alive because of you. Look at them.
If I made more money, I threw away so much money. You have no idea. If I just...
Generations, because of what you did.
I didn't do enough.
You did so much.
This car. Kurt would have bought this car. Why did I keep the car? 10 people right there. 10 people. 10 more people. This print. is this gold? Two more people. You would have given me two for it. At least one. You would have given me one. One more. One more person. Person, understand? For this. I could have got one more person.
Can you hear the message? Though what he did was responsible for saving some 900 plus Jewish people, those that would have died at the hands of a man and an army that tried to take them all. And while he was able to bring to salvation, saving them from this worldly ruler, he began to look at the value of everything around him. You see, grace is never intended to produce guilt. Grace is only designed for us to do what's right. To take the values that God has placed before us, to thank Him for every opportunity that He gives us to give.